Ivy Lawson had spent 2 years learning the precise choreography of making herself smaller voice, smaller opinions, smaller plate at dinner, smaller presence in every room Bradley Kane occupied, because smaller had once seemed like the only way to survive him. She was plus size, unapologetically so on the good days, and apologetically so on the bad ones. And Bradley had spent their entire relationship treating her body as a problem, requiring constant management, monitored meals, helpful gym memberships she never asked for, a running commentary on what she ate in public, disguised as concern. Leaving him 4 months ago had been the single most dangerous decision of her life, made in the aftermath of a night that still surfaced in her nightmares more often than she'd admit to anyone. Including her therapist, she had only meant to disappear into the nearest shadow. Instead, Ivy grabbed a stranger by the lapels in a marble hallway of the Biltmore Hotel and kissed him like her life depended on it. Because in that particular moment, it very well might have. The Miami Bar Foundation's annual gala roared behind her. An ocean of champagne and self-congratulation under crystal chandeliers. And Ivy had spent the last 20 minutes pressed against the wall near the dessert table, trying to become furniture. She was 29, a senior paralegal at Ellery and Voss, the kind of firm that billed more per hour than she made in a week. And she had worn the emerald wrap gown she'd saved 4 months to afford, because for one single night, she'd wanted to feel like she belonged in a room like this, instead of merely servicing it from the margins. That fragile confidence lasted exactly as long as it took her to spot Bradley Kane across the ballroom. Bradley was supposed to be in Atlanta. Bradley was supposed to be... By the terms of the restraining order, she'd finally been granted 4 months ago. Nowhere within 500 feet of her at all. But there he stood by the bar in a rented tuxedo, scanning the crowd with the particular predatory patience of a man who had spent 2 years teaching Ivy exactly how small she was allowed to make herself. And when his eyes finally found her, that patience curdled instantly into something colder. He started walking. Ivy didn't think. She turned and fled through the nearest exit. A set of heavy mahogany doors that spilled her into a dim, quiet corridor lined with private meeting rooms, her heels sinking silently into thick carpet, her pulse a hard, frantic drum in her ears. Footsteps followed almost immediately, unhurried, certain. The particular gait of a man who knew he had all the time in the world because he'd never once had to fear consequences. Ivy. Bradley's voice slid down the hallway. Honey, over broken glass. Don't be difficult. We just need to talk. The corridor was a dead end. No side exits. No restrooms. Nothing but a shadowed alcove halfway down, where a lone figure stood with his back to her, apparently absorbed in an oil painting on the wall. Bradley was rounding the corner. She had seconds, maybe less. Ivy didn't decide so much as simply act, some animal survival instinct overriding every ounce of the careful, apologetic self-control she'd spent 2 years relearning after Bradley. She lunged into the alcove, seized the stranger by the lapels of an immaculately tailored black suit, and pressed her mouth to his. She expected outrage. She expected to be shoved away in disgust, the way the world had trained her to expect from any man who found himself suddenly, unexpectedly touching her body. Instead, a pair of large, warm hands settled at her waist, not pushing, but pulling her flush against a chest like a wall of stone. The kiss, meant to be nothing more than camouflage, ignited instantly into something entirely, terrifyingly real. He tasted of good scotch and something darker underneath. And when his hand slid up to cradle the back of her neck, tangling in her hair, Ivy forgot, for 3 full seconds, that she was hiding from anyone at all. Bradley's footsteps passed the alcove without slowing, muttering a low curse into his phone, and continued on down the corridor and out of earshot entirely. Ivy pulled back first, gasping, her lipstick smeared, her whole body humming with an alarm that had nothing to do with fear anymore. "I am so sorry," she stammered, staring fixedly at the knot of his silk tie, rather than risk his face. "There was a man, my ex. He was following me, and I panicked. I didn't know what else to do. I'll just stay," the stranger said. And something in the low, rough gravel of his voice made her finally look up. He was, quite simply, the most dangerous-looking man she had ever seen. Up-close, sharp cheekbones, a jaw that could cut glass, dark eyes so deep they seemed to absorb the hallway's dim light rather than reflect it. He wasn't smiling, but there was something in his expression that looked almost like amusement. And beneath that, something considerably more predatory. I should go," Ivy whispered, before she could move. A soft, mechanical click echoed from the shadows further down the alcove, the unmistakable sound of a safety being switched off. Ivy's blood went to ice. She turned her head to find 3 men in dark suits emerging from an adjoining door, each with a hand resting inside his jacket. "Boss," one of them said, voice flat. "Problem." The stranger raised a single hand, and the men went still instantly. An obedience so immediate and total, it made Ivy's stomach drop. She looked back at the man she had just kissed with, sudden, dawning horror, and the pieces clicked into place with sickening speed. The deference, the security detail, the way the entire hallway seemed to have rearranged itself around his presence without her noticing. "No problem," he said, dark eyes never leaving her face. The lady was hiding. "That's all. I have to go," Ivy managed, and fled the alcove without waiting for a response, half running back toward the ballroom, her heart hammering so violently she thought it might crack a rib. She didn't look back. If she had, she would have seen Gabriel Rossi touch 2 fingers to his own lower lip. A slow, dangerous smile spreading across a face that very few people in Miami had ever seen smile at all. 3 days passed, Ivy told herself, repeatedly and without much success, that she had imagined the whole encounter into something more significant than it was a stranger. A kiss born of panic. Nothing more. Gabriel Rossi, she'd learned, within an hour of frantic, horrified Googling once she got home, was the head of the Rossi organization, a name attached in hushed whispers to half the Port Authority, contracts and construction permits in South Florida. A man the Miami-Dade State Attorney's Office had tried and failed to touch for over a decade. He had no reason to think about her again. She was a 5-second diversion in an otherwise unremarkable evening. Bradley, on the other hand, would not leave her alone. He'd found out somehow that she'd been at the gala. Since then, he had called her phone 31 times, alternating between weeping apologies and vicious, degrading voicemails. She'd stopped listening past the first 10 seconds of. He'd shown up outside her office building twice. He'd sent a single wilted bouquet to her desk with a card that read simply, "You'll come back. You always do." It was a humid Thursday evening, 3 days after the gala, when Ivy finally left the office, exhausted. Her tote bag heavy with case files she had no intention of touching that night. She let herself into the small lobby of her brickle apartment building and felt every ounce of relief drain out of her body at once. Bradley was sitting on the lobby bench, jacket rumpled, eyes glassy and manic. He stood the moment he saw her, blocking her path to the elevators. "Hey, Ivy," he said. Too soft, too pleasant. The exact voice he'd once used right before things turned. "We need to talk. You need to leave," Ivy said, forcing steadiness into her voice even as her hands began to shake. "There's a restraining order. Bradley, I will call the police." For what, his mouth twisted? "Talking to my girlfriend. I'm not your girlfriend. I haven't been for 6 months." She backed toward the glass doors. But he closed the distance in 2 long strides and grabbed her upper arm, fingers digging into her flesh with a familiar, sickening precision. "You don't get to decide that," Bradley hissed, yanking her close, his breath sour with cheap gin. "Look at you. Still fat. Still pathetic. Still, nobody else is ever going to want you the way I did. You should be grateful I still bother." Tears of humiliation sprang unbidden to Ivy's eyes. The old, poisoned script running automatically through her mind, even as some newer, harder part of her recognized it for the lie it had always been. "Let go of her." The voice was quiet. It carried the particular chilling weight of something that had never once needed volume to be obeyed. Bradley's head snapped toward the shadows near the mailboxes, where 3 men had materialized without a sound, and at the center of them, Gabriel Rossi, still and lethal in a charcoal suit. Dark eyes, fixed with total focus on the exact spot where Bradley's fingers bruised Ivy's arm. "Who the hell are you?" Bradley demanded. Though his bravado wavered visibly, Gabriel didn't answer him directly. He simply lifted 2 fingers. A small, economical gesture, and the scarred man beside him, Salvatore, Ivy would later learn, crossed the lobby in 3 unhurried strides, seized Bradley's wrist, and twisted with a sharp, sickening crack. Bradley screamed, collapsing to his knees, clutching his shattered wrist to his chest. Ivy stumbled back against the wall, staring in horror at the man writhing on the marble floor, then up at the men who had broken him without visible effort. Gabriel crossed the lobby, stepping over Bradley as though he were nothing more than an obstacle, and stopped directly in front of her, close enough that she caught the same scent of scotch and cedar from 3 nights earlier. "Open your eyes," he said, low. When she flinched them shut, she did. His dark gaze held hers with an intensity that made her knees weak. "He called you fat. He said no one else would want you." Something dangerous moved behind his eyes. "He is wrong on both counts. And I find I have very little patience left for men who make that particular mistake. Please," Ivy whispered, shame and fear tangling together in her chest. "Just let me go upstairs. You used a Mafia boss as a human shield 3 nights ago." Gabriel said, "Hello?" Rough note of something, almost like admiration threading through his voice. "And then ran from me before I could even learn your name. I have spent 3 days finding out anyway." His thumb brushed once, feather light, across her cheekbone. "I don't intend to let you disappear a second time. Salvatore." he said without looking away from her. Put Mr. Kane in the car. If he comes within a mile of her again, break the other hand. The transition from her building's dim lobby to a private elevator overlooking Biscayne Bay felt like a fever dream Ivy couldn't fully wake from. She hadn't packed a bag. Gabriel had simply draped his overcoat over her trembling shoulders and guided her into a waiting SUV. And now she stood in a penthouse larger than her entire apartment complex. Staring at a tray of untouched pastries, a silent housekeeper had left on the counter. You haven't eaten, Gabrielle observed, leaning in the doorway. Sleeves rolled to reveal forearms roped with old scars. I'm not hungry, Ivy lied, wrapping her arms defensively around her stomach, a habit 2 years with Bradley had carved into muscle memory. Mr. Rossi, I appreciate what you did, but I can't stay here. I have a job. I have a life. Gabriel crossed the room and stopped directly in front of her, close enough that the air between them felt charged. He reached down, gently prying her arms away from her stomach. You are hiding again, he said quietly. I would ask you to stop, especially in my own home. His dark eyes held hers. Your body is not something that requires an apology. Ivy, I find I have very little patience left for men, or the world in general. Insisting otherwise, it was, in fact, precisely her body, and everything the world assumed came attached to it, that had shaped nearly every professional instinct she possessed. Where Bradley had spent 2 years insisting she was lucky anyone tolerated her, the senior partners at Ellery and Voss had spent 5 years, quietly, systematically underestimating her competence for the same reason, routing her toward filing and scheduling rather than the complex asset forfeiture cases she'd actually built her specialty around. It was, in a roundabout and infuriating way, precisely why she'd become so exceptional at the thing they overlooked her for. She had spent years tracing shell companies and offshore accounts through half-buried court filings, purely because no one thought to stop her. Quietly becoming the firm's most reliable resource for exactly the kind of forensic financial work partners took credit for in front of clients. I'm a paralegal, not a mob associate, Ivy said, watching him with something between wariness and reluctant fascination. I don't understand what you think I can offer you beyond an awkward kiss in a hallway. Neither do I. Yet, Gabriel admitted, with a rare, unguarded honesty that surprised them both. I only know that I have not stopped thinking about you since that hallway. And I am not a man accustomed to distraction. You should know I don't do this, Ivy said, wrapping her arms around herself again, catching the motion this time and forcing them down. Whatever this is, I haven't let anyone this close since Bradley. I don't know how to trust a room I can't see all the exits of, let alone a man everyone in this city seems to be terrified of. She exhaled shakily. I keep waiting for the version of you that turns out to be exactly like him, just wearing a better suit. I understand the caution, Gabriel said, and something in the careful patience of his tone told her he meant it. I will not ask you to abandon it on my account. I only ask that you allow me the chance to prove myself wrong about that. One day at a time, for as long as it takes. Then I will make you a promise, and I intend to keep it regardless of what it costs me, Gabriel said, his voice dropping into something quieter, more deliberate than she'd yet heard from him. You will always know where every exit is in any room I occupy. You will never once feel cornered in my presence, by me or by anyone standing near me. I have built an empire on being the most dangerous man in every room I enter. I finned. With you, I would rather be the safest. Ivy's breath caught. That's a very strange thing for a mafia boss to promise a woman he met 3 days ago. I have never claimed to be predictable, Gabriel said. Something almost like warmth threading through his usual gravel. Only certain. Once I've decided, something matters. He was quiet a moment, watching her. My mother used to say, my father made exactly one honest promise in his entire life. And it was to her, on their wedding night, that she would never again have to wonder if she was safe in his house. I did not understand the weight of that promise until this exact moment, watching you decide whether to trust it from me. The days that followed unfolded with a strange, gravitational inevitability, neither of them fully acknowledged out loud. Ivy returned to her apartment, insisted on keeping her job, and found Gabriel appearing at increasingly implausible moments, regardless waiting outside the courthouse after a deposition, occupying a corner booth at the diner near her office, always unhurried, always watching her with the same total, undivided attention. He seemed to give everything he considered worth his time. It was, she came to notice, exactly the contradiction in her that seemed to fascinate him most. In social settings, she remained hesitant, apologetic, quick to shrink into corners the way 2 years of Bradley's cruelty had trained her to. But hand her a stack of financial records or a half-buried shell company structure, and something in her transformed completely sharp, relentless, utterly fearless. The same woman who had once spent 11 consecutive nights reconstructing a hedge fund's fraudulent asset trail purely because a partner had bet her she couldn't. You built an entire case against a Ponzi scheme nobody else at your firm could untangle, Gabriel said one evening. Reviewing a printout, Ivy hadn't realized he'd had Salvatore pull from public court records. And you did it in a week. Unpaid. Uncredited. Because a partner named Whitfield took the win in front of the client. How do you know that? I make it a habit to know everything about the people who interest me, Gabriel said simply. It is, I confess, considerably easier than learning to feel things about them, which I find I am somewhat out of practice at. 3 weeks after the gala, Gabriel invited her to a charity auction at the Vizcaya Museum, an event that required, in his own carefully understated words, something appropriate for the evening. What arrived instead was a garment bag from a design house on Lincoln Road, containing a floor-length gown in deep sapphire silk, cut by a designer who had taken Ivy's measurements without a single flicker of the polite discomfort she'd learned to expect. The dress didn't minimize her. It simply fit beautifully, following every curve she owned rather than apologizing for them. She stood in front of her mirror a long time before putting it on, thinking of 2 years spent making herself smaller, quieter, less visible in every room Bradley occupied. Then she zipped the dress and looked at herself fully. And, for the first time in longer than she could remember, did not flinch. When she stepped into the penthouse's grand foyer, Gabriel's carefully composed expression cracked entirely for a moment before he recovered it. Say something, Ivy said, half laughing, suddenly nervous under the weight of his stare. I am choosing my words carefully, he said, low, because Salvatore is standing directly behind me. He crossed to her, pressed a kiss to her knuckles with surprising formality. You look like exactly who you are. Evie, I only wish the rest of the world had figured that out before I did. The auction unfolded in a haze of champagne and hushed money. And Ivy stood at Gabriel's side, feeling, for the first time in years, entirely unashamed of the space she occupied. It was midway through the evening, near the silent auction tables. The trouble finally found them. Mr. Rossi, a silver-haired man in an ill-fitting tuxedo, approached with the particular oiliness of someone who wanted something. Tommy Russo sends his regards. He was disappointed you didn't return his calls about the Cutler Bay warehouses. Gabriel's expression didn't change, but Ivy felt the subtle shift in the arm beneath her hand. Muscle coiling tight. Tell Tommy I have no interest in his warehouses or his conversation. Enjoy the auction. The man's smile went thin. He also mentioned your new companion. Said it's remarkable what a man's weaknesses reveal about him. His eyes cut deliberately to Ivy, dragging over her with open contempt. A paralegal with access to half the city's dirty laundry. Working for a man who's spent a decade eluding federal scrutiny. Careful who you trust with your secrets. Mr. Rossi. Women like her have a way of talking. Once someone offers them a better deal, I would think very carefully about your next sentence, Gabriel said, his voice dropping into something so quiet and even that the temperature around them seemed to plummet. Because the woman you are describing just watched my associate break a man's wrist in a marble lobby for touching her without permission. And I promise you, Mr. Del Vecchio, I will not require Salvatore's assistance if you continue. Del Vecchio's smile faltered, just slightly, before he recovered it. Just a friendly warning. Mr. Rossi, Tommy sends his regards. He left before Gabriel could respond further, melting back into the crowd. And Ivy felt ice slide down her spine. What did he mean? Ivy asked. Once he was out of earshot, it means the Russo family has decided you're a piece worth threatening, Gabriel said grimly, already steering her toward the exit, his hand firm and protective at the small of her back. It means I need to move faster than I intended. That night, in the fortress of his penthouse, Gabriel laid out the full shape of what she'd stumbled into a decade-long rivalry with the Russo organization over control of the port's shipping contracts. A federal investigation quietly circling both families. And now, apparently, a target painted squarely on Ivy's back simply for having kissed the wrong man in a hallway. I want you gone from this city until it's resolved, Gabriel said, pacing before the fireplace. Something raw and unguarded, finally breaking through his usual composure. Somewhere safe. Somewhere they can't reach you. No, Ivy said, surprising herself with the steadiness of it. I'm not running. Gabriel, I ran from Bradley for 2 years, and it never once made me safer. Only smaller. If the Russos think I'm a weakness worth exploiting, then let me actually be useful instead of hidden away like a liability. Gabriel stopped pacing. What are you suggesting? I've spent 5 years tracing shell companies and offshore accounts through half-buried filings that nobody bothers checking twice, Ivy said, pulling up a chair to the desk in his study without waiting for permission. If the Russos are dirty enough to be a federal target, there's a paper trail. Let me find it. Let me build something your lawyers can actually use, instead of just protecting me like I'm made of glass. Something shifted in Gabriel's expression, surprise. And beneath it, a dawning respect that looked almost like relief. You would do that. For me. I'd do it for myself," Ivy corrected, though the softness in her voice betrayed the truer answer. "I'm tired of being the person things happen to. I want to be the reason something changes for once." For the next 4 days, Ivy barely slept, buried in financial disclosures and offshore registries with the same relentless, obsessive focus that had once cracked a Ponzi scheme her entire firm had declared unsolvable. Gabriel brought her coffee at 3 in the morning and read over her shoulder without comment, occasionally murmuring a name or a shipping route that helped a fragment click into place. "You're doing it again," he said on the second night, watching her cross-reference a shell company's registration date against a shipping manifest with the same brisk, unthinking precision that had earlier that evening led her to walk directly into a glass door in his study. The thing where you're brilliant and completely oblivious to your own surroundings in the same breath. That's an insulting way to compliment someone at 3 in the morning, Ivy muttered, not looking up from the spreadsheet. "I've never claimed to compliment gently." He set a fresh mug of coffee beside her elbow, close enough that his hand brushed her shoulder, lingering a moment longer than strictly necessary. "Tell me what you're seeing." "Russo's laundering nearly $40 million a year through phantom warehouse leases," Ivy said, pulling up a cross-referenced spreadsheet with the practiced ease of someone who had spent years being told this particular skill was decorative rather than valuable. The Cutler Bay properties are the linchpin real estate holding companies registered to addresses that don't exist, cycling payments through 3 jurisdictions before the money ever touches a legitimate account. It's sloppy work once you know where to look. Somebody got greedy and stopped covering their tracks about 18 months ago. "How long have you known how to do this?" Gabriel asked, something in his voice gone quiet and genuinely curious. "Since I realized nobody at my firm was ever going to let me argue a case in front of a jury, no matter how good I was," Ivy admitted. "So I got good at the part of the work that happens in the shadows. Instead, the part nobody notices until it wins the case for them. I got very good at being the person whose work everyone uses and nobody credits." She glanced up at him, something raw in her expression. "I think some part of me has been rehearsing for this exact moment my entire career without knowing it." "Then let it be known now," Gabriel said quietly. "Whatever comes of this, your name goes on it. I do not build things on other people's uncredited work. Ivy, I have seen enough of that already. Watching you." By the 4th night, she had it, a labyrinth of shell corporations, funneling laundered cash through the very Cutler Bay warehouses the Russo family had tried to pressure Gabriel into selling. Evidence detailed enough to hand federal investigators a case that would collapse Tommy Russo's entire operation without a single shot fired. "This is extraordinary," Gabriel said, flipping through the final printed report at dawn. Something like wonder breaking through his usual stillness. "You built this in 4 days. My own financial people have been circling this for 2 years. I had a good reason to move fast," Ivy said, exhausted and quietly, fiercely proud. "Somebody threatened to hurt me for being useful to you. I decided the correct response was to be so useful they'd regret it." Tommy Russo did not take the exposure gracefully. 2 nights after Gabriel's people quietly delivered the evidence to a trusted federal contact, carefully laundered of any fingerprints connecting it back to the Rossi organization, a black SUV rammed the barrier outside Ivy's apartment building, and 3 armed men breached the lobby before Gabriel's security detail, already stationed there on his standing orders, cut them down in a brief, brutal exchange that left the marble floor sprayed with blood and Ivy pressed flat against the stairwell wall. Gabriel's body, a wall of muscle and fury shielding her from the gunfire. When the shooting stopped, Gabriel turned her gently by the shoulders, running frantic hands over her body, checking for wounds she didn't have. His usual composure entirely gone. "Are you hurt, Ivy? Look at me. Are you hurt? I'm okay," she managed, trembling violently, adrenaline roaring through every nerve. "I'm okay." "Gabriel." Salvatore was already barking orders into a radio behind them, coordinating a cleanup that would, within the hour, scrub any trace of the confrontation from the building's official record, a burglary attempt, a tragic exchange of gunfire between rival criminals. Nothing that would ever connect back to the woman standing frozen against the stairwell wall. Ivy understood, distantly, that this was simply how Gabriel's world absorbed violence, folding it quietly into narratives the rest of the city would never question. She found, to her own surprise, that she wasn't horrified by the efficiency of it. She was grateful. He pulled her against his chest so tightly she could feel his heart hammering as hard as her own. "I should never have let you stay in the city," he said, hoarsely, into her hair. "I should have put you on a plane the second Russo said your name, and I would have come back," Ivy said, pulling back just enough to look at him. "Because I'm not running anymore. Not from Bradley. Not from the Russes. Not from you." She reached up, pressing her palm flat against his chest, over the frantic thud of his heart. "I told you. I'm done being the person things happen to." Something in Gabriel's face broke open entirely, the last careful wall of control finally giving way to something raw and unguarded. "You terrify me," he admitted, low and hoarse. "Not the danger. You. The fact that I would burn this entire city down without a second thought if it meant keeping you safe. And I have never once in my life felt that particular kind of fear for another person." "Good," Ivy said, something fierce and certain settling into her chest as she said it. "Because I intend to keep being someone worth being afraid for." They sat together on the marble stairs long after Salvatore's men had finished their grim work, Ivy's head resting against Gabriel's shoulder, neither of them speaking for a long while, the adrenaline slowly draining out of both their bodies in the quiet aftermath. "I keep thinking about the version of tonight where I never grabbed a stranger in a hallway 3 months ago," Ivy said eventually. "Quiet. Where I just kept running from Bradley the way I always had, and never learned any of this about myself. I try not to think about that version at all," Gabriel admitted, pressing a kiss to the crown of her head. "I find I am considerably fonder of the version where you exist in my life than any alternative I can construct." 3 weeks later, the federal indictment against Tommy Russo made the front page of the Miami Herald. His organization's port operations dismantled overnight by evidence investigators would only ever describe as an anonymous tip. Ivy stood on Gabriel's terrace, overlooking Biscayne Bay. The city lights scattered gold across the water, wearing a simple black dress that belonged entirely to her rather than any occasion. Watching the harbor traffic move beneath a sky, gone soft with evening, she thought about the woman she'd been 3 months earlier, pressed flat against a wall at a gala, trying to disappear before Bradley could find her. That woman would not have believed this version of herself existed standing in the home of the most powerful man in Miami, not as someone hidden or protected, but as the architect of the very evidence that had just brought down one of the city's most dangerous criminal empires. Ellery and Voss had, unsurprisingly, no idea any of it had happened. She'd handed in her resignation the week before, with considerably less ceremony than the moment deserved, and accepted a position with a boutique forensic accounting firm that had spent years trying to poach her without success, a firm that, this time, intended to put her name on the door of every case she touched. Gabriel's hand found hers on the railing. Unhurried. Certain. The way it always did now. You never did tell me, he said quietly. What made you grab a stranger in a hallway 3 months ago, instead of simply running past him? Instinct, Ivy admitted, leaning into him despite herself. I'd spent 2 years being told I was too much to be wanted and too invisible to be believed. Some part of me just decided, for one reckless second, to stop asking permission to take up space. She glanced up at him. I didn't expect the stranger to turn out to be the most dangerous man in Miami. I didn't expect the woman hiding from her ex to be the one who eventually dismantled my greatest rival with a laptop and 4 sleepless nights. Gabriel said, something almost like a real smile breaking through his usual stillness. He turned to face her fully, drawing her closer, his forehead resting against hers. I find I have stopped being able to imagine this life without you in it. Ivy. That is not a sentence I say lightly, or often, or at all. If I am being entirely honest, that's a very roundabout way of telling a woman you're falling for her. Mr. Rossi, Ivy said, though her voice had gone soft and unsteady. I've never claimed to be simple, Gabrielle murmured, his hand rising to cradle her jaw with a gentleness that felt entirely at odds with everything the city whispered about him. But I am, for what it's worth, entirely certain. I am not interested in simple. I am interested in you exactly as you are, taking up exactly as much space as you please, for as long as you'll let me stand beside you while you do it. When he kissed her, it was slow and certain, utterly unhurried, the kind of kiss that made promises rather than demands. Below them, the city carried on its restless, indifferent rhythm, entirely unaware that the woman it had once overlooked now stood above it all. Finally, completely seen, not hidden in some dangerous man's shadow, but standing fully in the light beside him, exactly as capable of protecting him as he was of protecting her. There will be more of them, Ivy said quietly, meaning Bradley's kind, meaning the Russos' kind, meaning every voice that had ever decided her worth before she'd had the chance to prove it herself. People who think a woman like me is easy to underestimate. Let them, Gabriel said, drawing her impossibly closer, his voice dropping into the low, rough register she'd come to recognize as reserved only for her. I find I have developed a considerable taste for watching people like that discover exactly how wrong they were. Starting tonight, and for as long as this city is still standing, somewhere below them, the bay kept its slow, indifferent rhythm against the seawall, entirely unaware of the quiet, seismic correction that had just taken place in one corner of that glittering skyline. A woman who had spent 2 years learning to disappear, finally standing in the full light of her own life and refusing to apologize for a single inch of the space she filled. Gabriel pressed one more slow, unhurried kiss to her temple, and Ivy let herself lean into it fully, without flinching, without shrinking, without asking anyone's permission at all.